Today is Friday, April 25th, 2014, and I am here at the offices of the Gold Coast Veterans Foundation in Camarillo, California, speaking with Ron Greenwood about his experiences in the Army during the Vietnam War. I'm Elizabeth Lee, and I will be interviewing Ron on behalf of the Conejo Valley National Society Daughters of the American Revolution for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Ed Lynch of Advanta Videography will be taping the interview. Ron was born on April 17, 1948, and enlisted in the U.S. Army at age 19. During his time in the service, the squad leader received the following commendations: a Purple Heart Medal, Combat Infantry Badge, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, National Defense Service Medal, and Sharpshooter Recognition. Ron currently serves as the chairman of the Gold Coast Veterans Foundation. And their mission, as stated online, is to improve the quality of life for veterans and their families in the Tri-County areas of California's Gold Coast. And this is Ron's story. Okay, let's start out a little bit, Ron, and talk about where you grew up, where you were born.
I was born in Oakland, California, but I grew up in the suburbs just over the hills called Lafayette, California.
Was there a history of military service in your family, or did you have a lot of brothers and sisters in the military?
I did. My brother served in the Marine. My older brother served in the Marines. He was 5 years older than me, so he served from 18 to 20. But he ended up staying down in San Diego, Camp Pendleton, where he still lives. But my mother had two brothers in World War II. One who flew Navy planes, actually had a plane shot out from under him. And the youngest of the siblings, in my mom's family, was a Marine. He was on the initial landing craft on two islands in the Pacific. He probably saw the worst duty of anybody.
Was there talk about the military in your family? Was there talk about the Vietnam War? Because it would have been going on 6 years. Oh, that didn't start 6 years till after you were born. That's correct, right?
I'm not exactly, I don't know exactly when we went into Vietnam. It was a late
I think 56, yeah.
Okay, 56.
Yeah.
I was 8.
Yeah.
Before I joined the Army and ended up in Vietnam, yeah, we talked about the Vietnam War. I mean, it was on the news every night, and there were beginning to be, discussions of whether we should be there or shouldn't be there. I think that really became much more, much broader after I returned from service. That the protests that I saw were huge at that point. Hundreds of thousands of people in cities.
How'd you feel about that when you saw that?
Well, I before I got out of Vietnam, I had a personal opinion we didn't have any business being there, and wasn't in our national security interest.
Yeah.
So I didn't think it was a war that was
So you weren't
required.
offended when you got back?
No.
Your brother, being older than you and serving in the Marines, he would have missed it, right?
He did, yes.
Where did he serve?
Camp Pendleton down in San Diego, and he never left. He's still down there.
Okay, so he's been there the whole time.
Yeah.
Do you keep in touch with him down there?
Yeah, we stay in touch.
What was it like? Did you have a close family? What was it like growing up?
Well, I had 2 sisters and 1 brother, so there were 6 in the family. We had pretty much an average life, We were all in school, and then by the time I graduated high school, I was gone.
And you were aware of the draft before you enlisted, is that?
Well, what I did is I worked and saved some money, and then I went to New York, and then I flew over to Europe, and I hitchhiked around Europe for about 3.5, 4 months. And I came back and went to junior college, and that's when I got a draft notice.
And then you enlisted, though? You were not? I mean, you were drafted, but you enlisted.
Once I got my draft notice, I thought I'd enlist. I don't remember the test, but they had me take some tests, and I scored pretty highly, so they were offering me, I signed up for 4 years to go into the Army Security Agency.
And why did you select that particular thing?
I thought it would keep me safe and keep me out of the war, or if I was in Vietnam, I probably wouldn't be in the front lines if I was with the Army Security Agency.
And you specifically selected the Army even though your brother had been in the Marines.
Yes, I don't recall why.
Okay. Do you remember where you went to enlist? Where'd you
It was in downtown Oakland.
Okay. What happens when you enlist? During the Vietnam War, what happened then?
I don't recall. You know, you go down your list, and then you're actually called down, and you have to be sworn in, and then off you go. We went on, if I remember, a bus to Fort Ord.
Okay, and that's where you went
Down
for
in
basic?
Monterey, yeah, that's where I did basic.
Okay. And you were there for what, the typical training period, and then,
I believe it was 3 months.
yeah, and then you went for advanced training as well.
Well, then we got some time off after basic, and then I went to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, is where I was going to work with the Army Security Agency.
And they were going to train you,
You know, that's sort of like the Army CIA, the nation's NSA. The Army had their own security organization.
so what did you do in the basic training?
A lot of, you know, physical training, you know, learning to fire weapons, discipline, marching, a lot of physical training, a lot of running, and a lot of hurry up and wait,
Okay,
and a lot of long hours. Yeah, we used to get up at 3 or 3:30 in the morning, start.
till what time?
I think we'd probably go to bed around 9.
Was that every day?
Every day that we were training, yes, unless it was a day off or a pass, which you didn't get too many.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you get time off during the training?
No, I didn't usually get too much time off. I always seemed to be in trouble when there was a weekend pass or a day pass. So
Trouble how?
I was probably speaking more than I should have and not remaining quiet.
And that kind of continued into advanced training.
I suppose that's part of my personality. So
Yeah.
yeah, it continued.
It's a good trait for, you're an attorney, right?
Yes, I became an attorney after I got out of the Army.
Yeah, so that's kind of a
Practiced for
good
20
trait for an attorney.
Good, yeah, but
Good
not
channeling of
particularly
your
good for
abilities.
being a soldier. That's what got me kicked out of ASA, is my big mouth.
Yeah, tell us about that, if you want to.
I don't remember exactly what I said, but we were at some formation and there was a colonel, you know, doing whatever he was doing, and if I recall, I probably said something a little bit on the smart aleck side, and he didn't take it well, and so he told me I was going to be yanked from the ASA and I was going to go to advanced infantry training and I was going to be sent to Vietnam in the infantry, which is ultimately what happened.
Okay. How long had you been in the advanced training?
The advanced training,
Before you got sent to the advanced infantry training?
well, I did basic training, then I went to Fort Devens.
Right, and how long
With
were
the-
you there before you moved on?
I was probably in Fort Devens only about 2 months.
Okay, and then they moved you on?
And then I went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, did advanced training. And then we got sent out to Fort Lewis, Washington. This was when President Johnson was building up forces in Vietnam. So the 199th at that time had 4 battalions, and we formed at Fort Lewis the 5th Battalion. And we jungle trained from December to the end of March in winter in the Northwest.
Now, did everybody do this advanced infantry? I mean, or did most people just go over to Vietnam after the basic?
I don't know. I don't think you ever go after just basic. I think you then have to go for advanced infantry, because then you really have to learn to work together as a squad, as a platoon, as a company, etc. And I know there was a lot of jungle training, because quite a bit of it went on in Panama, which was a little more realistic to the
Than what you
environment
did.
than we did in Washington State. I mean, there is a rainforest in Washington State, but obviously it's not the same climate as when you're talking about a jungle.
No. And you had a funny story about doing this in the snow?
Well, the first day and night out, you know, we went to this area and we set up our pup tents, and we got up in the morning, and there was 6 inches of snow on the ground. And then our last maneuver, before we got 30 days off and then shipped out to Vietnam, was we had to take this hill, and we had to wade through a swamp, the people I was with, and we were breaking about, I don't know, a third to a half an inch of ice on the water as we waded through it. And of course, 30 days later, we're over where it's
Yeah, and that never
105
happened in
degrees and
Vietnam,
100% humidity, and we were not quite acclimated for
And
Vietnam.
you also were telling me that there's a fairly rigorous thing that you have to accomplish before you can graduate.
What we had to do, and we did this in advanced infantry training, was we had to carry somebody in the fireman's position, which is an arm and a leg over your shoulders, and you're holding them together, and they had to be close or equivalent to your weight, and you had to be able to carry them a mile in 15 minutes,
Yeah,
which I certainly couldn't do today.
to get them to a medevac.
Yep, everybody knew why.
Did you ever have to do that when you were there?
No, I drug a wounded guy out, but I couldn't carry him because we were under fire, so it was in rice paddies, so I crawled in the mud and slithered over the dikes and drug him back by an arm.
Did they carry you when you were wounded?
They were able to land a helicopter pretty close, so yeah, I don't recall exactly. I imagine they threw me on some sort of stretcher or something. Sometimes we just take a poncho and, get guys in four corners. But I remember they could have flung me on the back of the helicopter and off it went.
And then you got 30 days off. What'd you do during those 30 days before you shipped out?
I had a girlfriend up there in Washington, spent some time there, and then I came down and spent some time in the Bay Area with my family.
How'd they feel about your going?
We didn't really talk about it. And the flight was out of, I believe, Oakland Airport. We got on a jet and flew to Vietnam, so.
A military jet?
No, it was a commercial flight, but the military had booked it. It was all full of soldiers.
What was the mood like with those soldiers when you departed?
I don't really recall. Probably somewhat reflective, you're flying off to go to war, so.
And when you landed, what did you think?
The first thing that hit almost all of us when the door opened and we were climbing down the stairs was the smell. Jungles sort of smell like composting, rotting material composting. It's got a very peculiar, you got used to it immediately within a day, but the first instant you came out, it didn't smell the same as...
It smelled like manure?
It wasn't that bad, but it was, just the environment of it's 100% humidity and 105 degrees, and there's a lot of plant life around, moisture, water.
What did it look like?
Well, we landed, on an airfield at a military base, so
Okay. What was the base?
Long Bin,
Right.
just outside of
And
Saigon.
LBJ is Long Bin Jail.
LBJ was a nickname for the brig that was there, which I spent no time with.
That's good.
I was on better behavior by then.
That's good. You learned your lesson well, huh?
Well, I'd learned to keep my mouth closed, that's for sure.
And the barracks were on the base. So you went, what'd you do after you landed? Where'd you go?
We had a few days to acclimate, and then we went to some classes and were told some things about the Vietnamese and the culture, and
Do you want to share what they told you, or do you think it's relevant?
I don't really recall much of the details, obviously to, be decent and, you're representing your country. Don't do anything stupid. Don't be mean to people in the villages, and, which I think everybody probably didn't need to be told, but.
And they told you what your mission was at that point?
Not really. They kept, I was an E1 at that point, so I wasn't told much of anything other than, let's get ready, we're going somewhere.
We have a picture over there that shows kind of where you landed, and maybe if we held that up for the camera, you could kind of show us where you were, because people viewing this tape may not.
Saigon is down here, so Long Bin was right up in here.
That's where you landed.
So we were, that's the rear base camp, Long Bin, big base, huge base.
How many men were at that base?
I have no idea. I was just housed with the men I trained with and went shipped over there.
How many people were you housed with?
I don't know. I don't recall how many fit in a barracks, but we were Our company was in various barracks, took more than one to get us all in, I don't recall.
Okay.
Didn't spend much time there, actually.
Yeah, so after a couple days,
We packed up and moved out.
yeah, tell me what you did.
They just loaded us on some trucks, we were in the back of trucks, and they drove us somewhere, and then that first evening, we set up a camp, dug in foxholes, put up, concertina wire, put out mines, and
Who did that? Who put the mines out? Did you?
I don't recall, I don't really know who set them up. I was doing other work setting up the base camp.
Okay.
I just remember what happened when two of the guys decided to go for a stroll that late afternoon
What?
and set off two of our Claymore mines, which,
Your own Claymore mines?
yep, our own. Somebody forgot to tell them, can't go outside now. It was a pretty unpleasant start.
Yeah, that was a shock.
When you trip a wire to a Claymore mine, there's not a lot of you left. So it was a pretty rude awakening to go try and find
And you were charged with
parts
finding
and
them?
pieces. No. A couple of guys I knew were,
Did you ever have to do that?
yeah.
Are these photos of the types of things that would be tripped off? Or how big was a Claymore mine? Neither of these are Claymore mines.
No, Claymore mine is about that wide, about that tall, and it's convex. I think I have it right, shaped that way. And it has little legs you can put out. And it's the front of it are all ball bearings about the size, steel ball bearings the size of marbles. And then behind it is explosive. So when it goes off, it shoots a huge pattern of, I don't remember if there's 100 marbles or ball bearings in there, but it's, if you're anywhere near that, you don't survive.
And are they buried underground?
No, they're sitting above the ground. That way the blast can go out. So if
So
we
they
had,
didn't see them?
if we had, they didn't see them.
Because it was dark.
They hit well, it wasn't quite dark, but
And where did the tripwires go? Just out on the ground?
just out to something where when your foot hits it, the pin comes out and that sets it off. So if one was to go off here, the blast would go out like this, and it would probably kill everything within maybe 10 yards. Not certain, but it would certainly hit everything within 10 yards in this radius. Then obviously it goes further and further out. They're separating more, but close in, it's.
What about the ones from the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army? What did they use?
When they used grenades, they used two types. Usually they were using American grenades. And you know they're American grenades because when you hit the tripwire, it doesn't explode. Because American grenades are meant to pull the pin, you hold the handle to the grenade, and you throw the grenade, that's when the handle pops off. But it gives you usually 4 to 7 seconds for it to travel and land where you want and then explode. That was what happened when I was wounded. The other kind, we called them a Chi-Com grenade, that as soon as you hit the tripwire and the pin came out, it exploded immediately. They were only for booby traps.
Okay.
They weren't for throwing, because obviously you'd kill yourself.
And
in
they were
throwing.
buried?
Usually they were not buried, no. It's much better to have those types above the ground. They have a much greater impact. So they're usually tied to a little bush or,
Okay, so you
a
run into
little
the-
small tree. And then there'll be a wire maybe about 4 to 6 inches off the ground that goes across.
So when you moved out from that base camp, I think you told me that was the reason, and we've all seen the movies or pictures, why you got the machete, because those things would not be so easily concealed.
We usually didn't walk on trails in the jungle that existed because it's very easy for the booby traps to be set up. So we would hack our way through the jungle, mark our own trail. They're less likely to be hit with booby traps. But I know when I was in the hospital in Saigon and I'd been badly wounded, I went back and counted the casualties in our platoon, and we had 70% killed or wounded in the first 9 months. And a lot of it was from the booby traps and what we did for the first 6 months we were there, but what I thought were World War II tactics of large formations going through the jungle.
But
The
they,
enemy could hear us and know we were coming, and stand and fight when they wanted, flee, which they did most of the time, and then also leave some guys behind up on some high point who could pin us down for a while the rest of the unit got away, which happened quite a few times.
do you think the commanding officers just couldn't figure that out, or for a while, like 9 months?
I don't, I mean, a lot of us were kind of irritated, but with some of the grunts that we referred to ourselves, but we oftentimes joked that we thought some of the officers were back in Saigon having highballs and throwing darts at a map and saying, why don't we have these guys go on this mission today? But I'm sure they had a much better plan than what we thought. It just...
And you saw one, I think, did you say general the whole time you were there?
Yes. One general flew out in a helicopter with starched fatigues and spit-shine boots and jumped down in the muck and the mud of the rice paddies and walked with us for a while and walked around. It actually gave the men a really a good boost.
It improved morale?
Really improved morale. Because, not having anybody ever coming out and tell you, what the purpose is, what we're doing, why. There wasn't a lot of good communication. It just, we would be told there's a mission, and we're going here, and you're going to be doing this, and you're going to be doing that.
But your missions that you were on were primarily search and destroy?
Search and destroy. We would have usually 2 columns. We'd have somebody on the flank, some guys walking right flank and left flank, trying to make sure we don't walk into an ambush. Sometimes we'd have helicopters flying overhead, which most of us didn't understand, because clearly that's just letting the enemy know where we are. Really dangerous when you had to cover open areas. Sometimes we'd have to cover, open fields from a part of a jungle to get in the next
jungle
part of a deep jungle. Because it was one day that from about 2 miles away, it was a hill we got pinned down for about 2 or 3 hours. Turned out it was probably 3 or 4 guys, but took us a while before we could, pinpoint where they were and get artillery on them. But nonetheless, they held up held us up for a few hours from the maneuver we were on.
And you found them?
Oh no, they were long gone before we got there. They were 2 miles away.
But were you covered by a helicopter at that point?
No, the helicopters kind of leave at that point. I mean, I think some helicopter gunships went out trying to find, who was there. Helicopter gunships were good, because we were air cavalry. If we had to go from one area to another area, we would get on helicopters and they'd fly us into a landing zone, and then we'd move out, into a new area, and then we'd be setting up our forward base camp out there.
Okay. How long would you be out for? How long would you be out on these missions?
Months.
And you would be in the jungle buried for a period of a month, or?
Well, I'm
without
trying to
getting to a base camp?
I'm trying to remember that in the first 6 months of being over there, I don't recall. I don't recall much time off. I served with the 199th Light Infantry in Vietnam.
And at one point you told me you were there for like 5 days and 5 nights before you got to the next base camp.
No, the 5 days and 5 after, and I don't recall whether it's 6 or 7 months of these search and destroy missions,
right?
Which I think the people in charge decided weren't as effective at accomplishing the goals as they wanted. We then started dividing platoons of 44 men up into 4-man squads of 11 people.
And you were a squad leader? And
I was a squad leader. And we were supposed to go out for 5 days and 5 nights.
That's the guerrilla warfare.
That was the guerrilla warfare, yes.
Did you ever know why they changed over? I mean, did they look at the statistics, do you think, the 70%? Because that was pretty true across the board, not just in your...
I don't know about other units, but I thought the casualties were exorbitantly high. I thought the search and destroy allowed the enemy to know where we were more than we knew where they were. One day we were on a mission, and we paused, and somebody looked down, and on the ground it looked like there was a little hole and kind of a mound, and we were actually standing on a Viet Cong underground base. Probably would have held as many as 200 men.
Okay.
And we actually went down, found some openings, went down into the underground tunnels. Those were all rifle ports all around in a circle, so it was a 360 degree. They had been there, they heard us coming, and they left because there was still rice that was hot and fires that were still warm
Must have
when we
been
went
weird.
down there. It was very weird. It was very weird. We ended up, putting a lot of explosives and blowing them up, but
But there were only, is this one of the smaller where you had the 6 to 11 men in your squad, and then?
no, this is
There's
when we
200
were
men?
still doing search and destroy.
Okay, okay, so there's a lot of,
Yeah, the
upwards of what, 2,000 men? or-
upwards of 2,000.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the first ones we did was 2 columns of 1,000,
right,
which
it's a lot of men.
is a lot of men and a lot of noise, and pretty easy for somebody who's hiding in a jungle to not only spot you but to hear you.
Were people quiet when they were walking, or did they?
Yeah, we'd be quiet, but I mean, nonetheless, if you take a machete and start chopping your way through the jungle, if somebody's 10, 20, 30 yards away, they're going to hear it.
So they were, the people that left the underground
They didn't
did
want to.
so because there were
There was too many of us, and
Yeah.
I would think they were hoping we wouldn't find their hideout.
Did you find any more of those?
Yes, we did. I think we found 2 or 3.
Always vacant.
Always vacant. Yes,
But that was the one where you know that they were the most recently there.
because food
the
was
rice.
cooking in the.
Did you eat?
We didn't eat their food. No, I don't.
You're probably pretty hungry, right? Because if you're out there, the guerrilla warfare, you were out there for, like I said, the 5 to 6 days at a time, right?
We were eating K rations every day. Canned
sleeping
canned
on the
food.
ground.
Sleeping on the ground.
Not showering.
Usually not showering. You could probably get a shower at a forward base camp. We had crates we set up, big wooden crates, and they'd take a 55-gallon drum, paint it black, mount it on top. Then they had a little shower head they put on it, and there was kind of a valve to turn it off. So you'd fill it up with water in the morning, let it sit out all day, and then in the evening, of course, they were pretty quick showers, but you could have warm water.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when we were out in country, if we were in a safe place, if it started to rain, you just take your clothes off and soap up and
Jeez.
hope it kept raining so you could rinse off, and then you'd put your wet clothes back on.
I wonder how many vaccinations you have to go over there.
I don't recall, but we got a lot of shots. We got a lot of shots. I had one incident I just remembered. We were on maneuvers one day, and they called a stop. I was a cigarette smoker when I was there. So when I got my lighter, and got ready to light my cigarette, I looked down like this, and noticed there was a hand grenade on a bush and a wire right in front of me, about a foot in front of me. And if they hadn't called stop exactly when they did, I wasn't
tripped
looking.
the wire.
I would have hit the wire and probably would have been dead.
Yeah, you had a situation where you stopped a guy right before he tripped something.
Yeah, that was at the tail end of our search and destroy.
Tell us about that.
We were over by the Cambodian borders in what was called a free fire zone. It had old pineapple plantation. French, I think, were over there. And free fire zone is where they've moved all the villagers out. So nobody's supposed to be there. So our orders are, if you see anybody, you shoot them. Because they relocated everybody who used to live in that area. So we were going down these old gravel roads with the pineapple fields on one side, the jungle on the other. And we came across unexploded ordnance. And when I had spotted that hand grenade that was, a foot away from me when I stopped to light a cigarette, that's when I started learning how to dismantle things, because I was right there, so I was the one who went down and secured it and, made sure it couldn't go off. So I ended up becoming, in our platoon, the demolitions expert. So we were picking up this ordnance, and we get a certain volume and weight. I would have the guys put it out, far away from the road, and put some explosives to it and blow it up. We'd done that a couple times the first day, and we'd done it once on day 2. And then when you're walking down a road in the infantry, you go in a V formation. So that somebody fires at you, there isn't somebody straight across this way to get hit. So, and I had guys that were just in the field for 2 days when they were on this maneuver. So I was here, and the guy I saw who was about to pick up an ordnance was over here, and I'm guessing it's anywhere from 8 to 10 feet from me. And as I saw him reaching down, something came over me, and I realized I couldn't let him pick it up. And of course, how long does it take for me to bend over and pick something up off the floor? It's probably 2 seconds. So I carried a grenade launcher, which is looks sort of like a sawed-off shotgun. You have a picture.
Yeah, do you have some photos of that?
I have a picture of one here because Potter is carrying a grenade launcher here. I don't know if you can see that. So I had the butt on my shoulder and the barrel down by my thigh. So what I did is, all this happened just an instant. I grabbed the end of the barrel of my gun, took a giant step, and was swinging around, took another step, and I smashed him in his right knee with the butt of my grenade launcher. And I hit him hard enough so that he had to grab his knee, he fell to the ground. He was yelling at me, and some other guys were yelling at me. People were pretty irritated with me at that moment, and
That would have stopped him.
I had everybody clear out, and I put some explosives to it, and I blew it in the place, and had a 40-pound anti-tank mine under it, and left a crater about 6 feet across and about 2.5 feet deep. Would have killed at least 3 of us and probably wounded 5 or 6 or 7 more guys. So I've never taken credit for having some whatever. I don't know what, I mean, to this day I don't know what happened other than the minute I saw him reaching for it, I absolutely knew it couldn't be picked up, and somehow I did the only thing that I could possibly do in less than 2 seconds to not have him pick it up. So that's something that really has stuck with me. I still don't understand it.
What?
How that feeling came across me, where it came from. I certainly don't take credit for it, and particularly when we've been picking up all kinds of stuff for days, probably blown 75, 80 various unexploded artillery shells and things. Anti-tank mines. This sort of looks like one. You have a picture here, I think. This sort of looks like an anti-tank mine. They have the 2 that I was aware of in Vietnam and those are buried because they're called anti-tank because the tank track would roll over it and then boom, it would blow up into the track and disable the tank. But so usually you could bury it, and then there would be a little pin that if you stepped on the pin or pushed the pin down, that detonates it. The other way the other type of detonation device was there was a pin that was locked in, and then you set something over that pin to hold it down, and then you pull out the locking device, and whether that rock or that artillery shell gets lifted, as soon as it comes off, the pin pops out and it explodes. So that was how that one was detonated, obviously.
Were you trained to dismantle these things, or did you just?
Not really.
I mean, it's fairly dangerous if you don't have training to just.
Well, I had some guidance, and but I didn't have any formal training. It was on-the-job training.
Do people assign you to? Because after that, you started assuming that as part of your responsibility.
I just sort of assumed it. I guess people said if he's crazy enough to do it, let the SOB do it. Probably if you're a more sane person than me, you...
What drove you to do that, do you know?
I don't know. That's why I just went back to that, when I got lucky that I didn't trip one off, and, we all started paying a lot more close attention to the ground when we were walking as well as trying to be looking out for the enemy. But
you've got some other photos of your time in the jungle. Do you want to show some of those on camera here?
Yeah, these photos were taken one day. We were still doing search and destroy on these. This was when we still had hundreds of guys around, or at least our full company. And we had a mail drop, and my mother had sent a care package which had tuna fish and some other things.
Hopefully in a can.
In a can, yeah.
Not in a sandwich.
And no, and we mixed up the tuna fish in a helmet, and the guys were sharing it here. This is another one of the guys from our unit who, he was in our company, not in my platoon, who
And I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but he's
got a little monkey on his shoulder, and he used to keep that monkey with him all the time. I mean, usually he'd be fully loaded down with equipment, and that monkey would ride on his shoulder, his back, and
Which one of those guys was the one in Hamburger Hill? One of those.
oh yes, that was Johnny Keys. Johnny Keys is right here.
Yeah, we don't know what happened to Johnny Keys, but
We just know that he was pulled out of our unit. We were told he was sent up to Hamburger Hill with the 101st Airborne to reinforce. And then I had heard a few days later that he actually had gotten shot through the stomach.
I wonder how he got pulled. I wonder.
I have no idea. Just, word just came, hey, you, and you, let's go. That's sort of how those things occur.
And there's some other pictures there too.
Well, these pictures are all
These are
taken.
not search and destroy. This is when you were doing, when you
This
converted over to the guerrilla type of
is
warfare.
when we broke into, in theory, 11-man squads.
Right, which you
Because a
didn't have, right?
platoon is supposed to have 44. The most I ever had in my squad was 7. The least I ever had was 5. Simply because they couldn't get replacements to us soon enough. So we would go out for 5 days and 5 nights on an ambush. So this is a picture of some of us kind of just hiding out during the day, because the ambushes were, we'd move into ambush positions at twilight and set up an ambush and stay there until just before the sun started to come up. And then we'd move out before the sun came out, try and hide out during the day. There'd be 2 or 3 guys on guard duty to make sure, nobody's sneaking up on us. The rest of us trying to relax, sleep, take it easy, and then switch off and go do guard duty. This is Potter. His name was Wesley Potter, but we always called him Potter. He was the guy I became closest to in my squad. We were not supposed to make friends in the infantry.
They tell you that?
Oh yeah, you can have a buddy, but try not to make too many friends. It's too tough when they get killed. So he and I were close. In January of 1969, I went on R&R to Hawaii, and you're not supposed to leave Hawaii, so of course the first thing I did was go to the airport and get on a plane and fly to San Francisco. Turned it out that January of 1969 was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary, and the party was held at my brother's house, who was in Concord, California at that time. So went to their 30th anniversary party. Next day back to San Francisco airport, back to Hawaii, and that was sort of my R&R, and then back to Vietnam.
Not too restful.
And when I got to Long Binh, I had a day to be there before I had to return to the unit, and that's when I was told that Potter had been killed while I was gone. I'd been trying to train him to be a demolitions guy too. The story I was told is he was trying to deactivate a booby trap, and it exploded and obviously killed him instantly. That was a pretty rough day.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you feel responsible?
I don't know that I felt responsible. Obviously, I certainly questioned myself whether I trained him well enough, thoroughly enough. I certainly was thinking that, gee, if I hadn't taken R&R, that could have been me. So you have a lot of, gee,
Survivor guilt?
yeah, why am I here? Why is he not? I didn't know a lot about Potter, and I knew that he was raised by his grandparents. I knew that he was married, because he talked about all the sex he had the week before he went to Vietnam. Some of us were jealous, but yeah, it was pretty sad. I can't remember when, but when I was lobbying in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer for some disabled veteran legislation, I finally went to the wall and found his name, yeah. And that's when I pulled out these photos of Potter, and because you can now have those photos digitally sent to a website that allows people to see who he was. I always felt guilty because I never tracked down his family after I came back from Vietnam, and never tracked down his wife, and never shared these photographs
Well, you were pretty
for a
young.
long, long time. So
Did you ever track her down?
No.
Do you want to?
I probably wouldn't know how to now. I mean, maybe I could. I hadn't thought of trying to track her down.
Well, I don't mean to put
No,
additional
no.
work on your plate.
She probably would like to know. When I got out of the service, I pretty well tried to put it behind me. Most of my friends had gone to college immediately after high school and avoided the draft. So, and you just didn't talk about things. I remember my wife Lisa, we married 34 years this year, and she used to ask me questions about Vietnam, so I started off telling her stories about insects,
Yeah.
like leeches.
Yeah,
And
tell
you
us about the leeches.
There's a lot of them. You know, you have to cross a canal, you know, and you're carrying your weapons over your head, and you get out the other side. You got to take your clothes off, and you got to have a buddy with a cigarette to come up and put it close to the leech, you know, on your back and your legs, because you can get everything in the front you can see yourself, but because you got to get them to pop their head out, and that's what the cigarette does. You get just enough heat that bothers them, they pop their head out, then you can kick them off, because you can't pull them off until they get their head out of your body. It's kind of gross the first time, and then, you know, it's became commonplace after that, you know. But if you've seen The African Queen, it was pretty much like that.
And did you ever tell her anything else, or did you stay with the animals?
I told her about one night when we moved into the wrong position to pull an ambush, and the sun goes down, it gets dark, and the mosquitoes came out. And I backpacked quite a few years in the summer in the High Sierras with the Boy Scouts, and so I'd been up in the High Sierras where, you know, in the lakes late in summer they have a lot of mosquitoes, but this was a night of mosquitoes from hell. They were so bad. I mean, you'd put mosquito repellent on and they'd land on you and you could see them, and they were big mosquitoes. And you take your mosquito repellent and kind of pour it on you so it's dripping off the bottom of your arm, and they'd still land and sting, go right through it. And I mean, it was dark, can't really move anywhere. We've got our ambush all set up. So what we did is we got two guys under a poncho, chain smoking a cigarette, staying under there until the smoke got so thick you had to get out just to not choke to death on the smoke. And of course you'd be attacked by mosquitoes, and two other guys would go in. We did that for 8 hours until the sun came up and we could move out. It was a pretty lousy night. So I would tell her those stories. I didn't really talk about
Your injury, or did you tell her what happened?
She knew what happened to me because I've got a lot of scars. So
Yeah.
you know, when you have a girlfriend or you have
Wife.
a wife, they've seen your body. So you know, so I didn't have any problem telling her. You know.
Yeah, but you just don't want to talk about your time there.
No, you know, it's amazing. I don't have the dreams anymore that involve war. But for a long time after I immediately got out, I did. I remember dreams when I was in law school, because it was kind of overwhelming, how much studying I had to do.
Yeah.
I remember
Berkeley,
what-
right?
Pardon me?
At Berkeley?
No, I did my undergraduate at Berkeley, but at Golden Gate University in San Francisco.
Okay.
And I remember one dream I had where we were set up in this perfect position to defend. We had tons and tons of ammunition. And the Vietnamese, and also in that dream the Chinese were coming, and we were just killing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And apparently we had a steady stream of ammunition, but it looked like we were still going to be run over because there were just so many of them. No matter how many you killed, you're still going to be overrun. But the one dream I remember the most is the first time my wife and I spent the night together. And I was having a dream that we were in a foxhole and a hand grenade came in. So I jumped on top of my wife, and I think she was kind of face down on the bed. She kept trying to stick her head up, so I had one arm that was shoving her head under my body, and I'm reaching around with my other arm trying to find the grenade and throw it out of the foxhole before it goes off, and I don't know. I think I got 2 grenades in and 2 grenades out before she finally threw me off and woke me up. Of course, she's thinking, "My God, what is this crazy? Why the hell do I want to be with this crazy Vietnam veteran?" And I'm thinking, boy, that really shows me how much I loved her, because I jumped on top of her, I put her head under me, and I was going to protect her with my body, and I was not going to let anything happen to her. So, you know, nice not to have those dreams.
How long did the dreams go on?
Well, let's see. I was 32 when I met Lisa, so that's 12 years after I got out of the Army.
That's a long time.
That is a long time. They weren't every night,
Right.
but
Yeah, but if you remember them when you wake up, I mean, certain dreams you might have them and not even remember them. And then if you remember them, that stays with you. So it's not as if it just happened that instance. It goes on, and then you probably think about it for days after.
yeah, I haven't. You know, I think I mentioned you before when we talked earlier in the week briefly that when I was finishing my undergraduate work at UC Berkeley, a professor who was taking an oral history of Vietnam veterans on the campus to preserve, and he tracked me down and talked to me, and I agreed to do it. And the day I was supposed to go talk to him and tell my story, I didn't show up. I never followed up with him. I never contacted him. And of course, when the day and the hour came, I realized I wasn't ready to talk about it. So it's interesting that that's 40 years ago.
Yeah, and you're finally ready.
40
Doing
years.
okay today.
I'm doing great today. Thank you. Let's see.
Did you ever tell her the story about the tigers?
I think I probably have. I'm sure I did.
Tell us.
This is again.
Please.
This was probably early. You know, probably in our first month of being on ambush, where we're now fighting a guerrilla warfare. And the idea was that we would move into an area during the day, and you know, we probably had been seen, and then at twilight, before it got dark, we would move from there, and we had a pre-assigned spot to pick out where we thought soldiers might be infiltrating Cambodia, and we would set up a deadly ambush and stay up all night. So this one, we were in the jungle, and I think it was probably somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m. when we started to hear some leaves rustling, like maybe a foot stepping on it. And of course, we've got claymore mines, we've got 2 machine guns, we've got, you know, all people ready just to... We had a lot of firepower with 7 guys in the jungle. And kept quietly hearing it, and you know, I didn't let anybody fire. We didn't need to just yet, and then, I don't know, at some point some moonlight somehow got through the jungle canopy or something, and we just saw this light hit these 2 big green eyes. We immediately knew it was a tiger. Kind of obviously had smelled us and just turned and walked off in a different direction. Lucky tiger too, because
Yeah, it didn't step on anything.
yeah, we didn't
Kill it.
yeah, we didn't kill it.
How big was it? Did you check?
I couldn't tell.
Too
No, it was dark, too
Just
dark.
the eyes.
But I don't know what they weigh. What do they weigh? 600 pounds? I think they're pretty large.
Were they defoliating the jungle when you were there
Yeah. Yeah.
from above?
Yeah, they're spraying Agent Orange. I mean, you know, for anybody who's been in a jungle, usually it's like a multi-100-foot canopy. So there can be trees that are a couple 100 feet up. But it's just completely and totally lush and thick, you know, with everything, vines and bushes and trees. And you can't walk in the jungle. You literally have to hack your way through. And we had some maneuvers when we were still doing search and destroy where we would come across, walk through former jungles, and the only thing left were the largest trees. There would be big stumps and things. You could see where the tree snapped over and fell, and there'd be a big stump sticking out. And then the rest we were walking in probably thigh-high to waist-high, maybe even higher, just brown muck, because the entire jungle had decomposed. And so all the water that used to be in all the plants, all the canopy, is just sitting there on this harsh clay soil that can't soak in. That was pretty disgusting. But And it just lets you know how powerful the defoliant was, that you literally could spray it on a jungle and kill every living plant in a jungle, and there isn't a green leaf anywhere.
Yeah, that was an interesting defoliant.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories of a lot of birth defects and things that happen for a
Yeah, I
lot
saw
of
some
people,
photos
and
of that.
a lot of illnesses that Vietnam veterans get that are attributed to, particularly the guys who were near when the spraying was occurring. Because they sprayed from planes, they played from helicopters, so obviously if it can kill a jungle, you can only imagine what would happen if a little bit of spray got on you, or you went through that particular area that was sprayed shortly after it was sprayed.
So you were fortunate you probably did not do that.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I mean,
Did anybody talk about it at that time? They just didn't know.
we talked about it just because it's so stunning to have been in a lush, healthy jungle, and then to see the after effects of what the defoliant did. Agent Orange, I mean, think about it, you know. You see these huge 100-year-old trees that we have around here, and you spray it, and it's going to be dead and rot to the ground in no time.
Did you ever fight alongside the South Vietnamese?
I wouldn't say fight alongside them, no. That was one of the things that a lot of us talked about in Vietnam, because the Americans were in the front lines. I was always in the front lines. Our unit was always in the front lines. And where we were, the Vietnamese always had the rear positions. So they'd be guarding bridges or things on roads behind us, but we were
The ones in danger.
we were in the front lines, and probably sometimes even in the enemy's territory. Probably sometimes behind enemy lines, but I don't know if they could really say there were lines like there were in World War II. But yeah, we had a couple of bad incidents. The first one was when we were doing our search and destroy. We were told that there was about 1,500 man NVA army that they were pretty sure was in this area. So we had the responsibility of moving into that area, pushing through, engaging them if they stayed and fought. And if they did not stay to fight, we were supposed to push them through to a river. And the Navy was going to be picking up the South Vietnamese and bringing them by boat and setting them up on the other side of the river, so that when we got them into the river, there would be somebody there to shoot them from the other side of the river. It was a real tough day, because we had the hard duty to push through that jungle and push them into the river. And when we got there, there was nobody on the other side of the river, and the NVA 1,500-man army had crossed the river, escaped. And we were told later from people that talked to the Navy that moved them in there, and some of the officers, that the South Vietnamese refused to get off the boats. So when you're over there fighting, you know, in somebody else's backyard, and they don't want to protect their own country, their own, where they live, where their family lives, you begin to question. Then we had another bad incident where I think we got a phone call, I don't know, maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We had to move to secure a bridge in a village. The story we heard that the South Vietnamese were guarding the bridge. The Viet Cong came up that night, had loudspeakers. They told them to get off the bridge or they're all going to be killed. They got off the bridge. The Viet Cong came in, set up an ambush on the bridge and set explosives to it. An American convoy came by early that morning, and they got ambushed, and after it was over, the bridge was blown up. One of the guys who was one of the American soldiers who was in the ambush had a leg blown off. I never heard if it was above the knee or below the knee, but I heard that he tied a tourniquet on his leg himself and crawled into the village, found a motorbike and got on it with one leg and drove back to a base to tell them what had happened, which is how we got the call to come in. It was a pretty unpleasant morning, because when we got on the bridge, the South Vietnamese were back there just like nothing had happened. And some of the men in my squad, as well as others, really were in the mood to shoot him, which we obviously didn't do and didn't allow to happen. But pretty tough to stay fully committed when you have a couple incidents like that. I think those 2 incidents turned quite a few men that I talked with in our platoon to realize that, my God, if the South Vietnamese don't want to defend themselves, and that's from the rear position, not being in the front lines, then we began to question why we were
Our
there.
involvement.
And I talk with people now, particularly a good friend of mine, a retired two-star Army general, and we have the same conversation about Afghanistan, because we're coming up on year 13, and Afghani Army ready to finally, after 13 years of training, defend their own country, if you can call it a country, because it's probably not a country, it's more, warlords and tribes, and they've never been unified, really, so.
And never will be.
Doesn't seem like it. Doesn't seem like we learned much from Vietnam about in Afghanistan. Trying to build a national. We'll see. We're going to be out of there at the end of the year. We'll see what happens. We all know what happened in South Vietnam.
And I'm assuming that your experiences with the South Vietnamese were probably not unique.
My experiences with the villagers in the South Viet generally was good. The problem in a guerrilla warfare, you never know who's a friend or foe. They can be very friendly during the day when you pass through a village on a mission, and you have no idea that they don't have, may have weapons out stashed in the jungle, and they're going to slip out that night and join some other Viet Cong friends, and it's almost impossible to know. And I think we have a lot of that, obviously in Iraq.
So technically, if they were going to do that, they were the enemy, but you passed through anyway because there was no way to tell.
Yeah, I mean, if you go through a village and you're searching for weapons and you find none, and how are you going to arrest somebody or take somebody in and say you're a Viet Cong? I mean, I look at the kind of thing that occurred in Iraq and always Afghanistan, where we have a lot of Afghani soldiers wearing the Afghani uniform who turn around and shoot Americans. So they, and I don't think they are doing it over an argument. I think, they were a Taliban or somebody who pretended they weren't, got in, and when an opportunity, so it's, those are hard wars to fight, really hard wars when you don't know who's a friend and who's a foe.
But you didn't have that problem with the South Vietnamese that you fought alongside. I mean, they didn't turn around. It was just, well, I guess it would be if you didn't know if they were actually Viet Cong.
I had 3 opportunities to fight along South Vietnamese. The first one was we were on a maneuver one day, came under heavy attack. We were air cavalry, so we were flown in on Huey helicopters, usually 5 or 6 guys on there. And, they come in, they're supposed to touch down for 3 to 4 seconds, you're off, taking up a defensive position.
Yeah, so you don't signal.
And they get the hell out of there. So our helicopters went back and loaded up with the South Vietnamese, and they came in and they refused to get off the helicopters. I think the helicopters stayed on the ground for maybe, I don't know, it's hard to tell you, maybe 10 seconds, 12, or maybe even longer. I mean, we could hear guys on the helicopters, door gunners, yelling to try and get them to, get off. And finally the helicopters had to take off because they're vulnerable. They're like a sitting duck. And we did see one South Vietnamese get shoved off the helicopter a few hundred feet up. Just assumed some door gunner, somebody probably put his boot in his back and shoved him out. But so I never had any time when the South Vietnamese actually fought with us. I had 3 times when they were supposed to be supporting us and did not.
How many, on any of these missions, how many people did you encounter? I mean, what was the most in terms of North Vietnamese? I guess we should probably clarify because some people watching the tape didn't grow up in that era. So there were the North Vietnamese Army, then there were the Viet Cong who were...
Who lived in South Vietnam and were living in the villages, but were sympathetic to the communists and that Ho Chi Minh wanted to unify Vietnam into one country because he was originally a nationalist before he became a communist. But,
right, and then we had the people fighting with, or in support of us from South Vietnam.
Yes, and I always sort of assumed after I left Vietnam that when we finally got out, it would end the way it did, because I just had the memories of they didn't seem to be that interested in stepping up and fighting with us in the front lines or even supporting us. So I didn't think there would be enough on the South Vietnamese military to fight the way you would need to be, because the communists were good fighters, there's no question about that.
There was another thing going on during the Vietnam War that people talked about, and you alluded to, but we never really addressed this on Monday, which is the fragging thing. You came up with something where you had to talk to one of the commanding officers coming over there, but that really wasn't a fragging incident because
Well,
the man lived.
I'm glad we talked Monday, because Monday I didn't have any emotions. I didn't have the emotions I had today when I came here that, oh, you're really going to do it now this time. That was just kind of a one-on-one talk with Lizzie.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a lot of black power at that time. And the things a lot of us would hear is the blacks were 10% of the population. They were 20% of the military. They were 30% of the front lines. So there were issues. And because our casualties were so high, the officers, the platoon leaders, second lieutenants, and the captains who led the companies, if they survived 6 months, they were rotated to a desk job. And so I don't recall how long the second lieutenant had been there, but I was in the area where a new second lieutenant who came to replace our first one, and it was a young black guy who came, and they crossed paths, and I didn't see the incident that started it, but I was told the young black guy did not salute the second lieutenant, and so the second lieutenant got on his case, and they got into an argument, and I was there, and I heard most of it, and the second lieutenant said, well, I'm going to send you back to LBJ, Long Bin Jail, where the kid had been. So he'd been in the brig, and now he was being sent out to, and I remember the kid saying, great, I'd rather be there than here. And then just a few moments later, a few seconds later, the second lieutenant, no, I said, I have a better idea. You're going to walk right flank today on our maneuvers. And later that afternoon, the lieutenant got shot through the back of the head by a sniper. We all assumed it was a young black kid that found an opening and killed him. So, talked about the South Vietnamese not supporting us. Now we're talking about Americans killing Americans. And so I didn't see any incidents of fragging. Obviously, we heard about people throwing grenades into a tent. Came close because literally a day or two before I got wounded, my squad was back in the forward base camp. And we had been out for 5 days and 5 nights. Now we get a couple days and a couple nights off, and first thing you do is sleep a lot and eat some better food. But we're pretty, and you can get a little shower, because when you're out for 5 days and 5 nights, you're not taking your shoes off, your boots, your clothes. It's 5 straight days of, plus you're carrying at least 80 pounds of food and ammunition. So he called me into his bunker, and he told me that my men were disheveled, and their boots weren't shiny, and there was cigarette butts all over the ground, and he wanted them picked up, and he wanted their boots shined, and I probably said some other things too. So I went back and told the men we weren't going to do it, but a couple of the men came back to my bunker, I don't know how long, within an hour, and said, you've been elected to talk to the second lieutenant. And what they told me was tell him he has 24 hours to live, and then they had certain conditions. One of which would be we're not picking up cigarette butts, we're not polishing our boots, and some of the other things that we're not going to do, and if he agrees, then he'll live, and if he doesn't, he won't. So I had to go into his bunker. So I said I told him by saying, this isn't coming from me, I've been elected to pass this message on to you.
Don't shoot the messenger.
And so I said, and the message is, there's some conditions for your survival, otherwise you have 24 hours to live. So I started with the boots, because I figured this one would be a good one. I said, we don't have shiny boots in the infantry in Vietnam. We don't want the sunlight to reflect off of our shiny boots ever and let somebody spot where we are. We want really scruffy, dirty boots that the sunlight just gets absorbed. And, I talked about our appearance. We're out for 5 days and 5 nights. We come back and we're tired. We didn't shave right away. You don't use the drinking water that you have to carry for 5 days and 5 nights to shave when you're out there. So we're going to come back looking pretty bedraggled. And, we usually get cleaned up before we go back out, but it might be a day or two, because some of the guys might sleep for 18 hours or something, Because when you're out up all night in an ambush, and then hiding out in the day and having to have maybe as much as, particularly when we only had 7 or 5 guys, we'd have 2 or 3 guys pulling guard duty. Only a couple of guys could be resting or sleeping. With 7, we could usually get away with 3 guards and 4 guys could rest. But I never knew what happened because it was either the next day we moved out or the day after. I think it was the next day we had to move out, go out again. And we went out, we moved out, and then moved into our ambush position. Nobody came through it, and then early that morning, my point man and I went to examine an area with some bushes, and there were rice paddies nearby, so it looked like it was a little elevated, but a good place where we could lay low, hide out during the day, and then move into a different ambush position. But as he was moving into the area, he hit a tripwire. It didn't explode immediately, and he was able to take a couple steps and dive behind a big rock and tree. As soon as, and he yelled as soon as he hit the tripwire, and I turned, because I wasn't going to go forward. I had my back to him, and there was nothing to get behind. There was a canal, and I think I got about 2 steps before it went off. And, it lifted me off the ground, because while I was in the air, I was, in my brain, in my mind, I'm seeing these old black and white westerns. I used to like certain westerns. And I was seeing the shootout in the street, when the marshal and the guy draw their guns.
Yeah.
If the guy gets hit and he kind of falls on his face or something, you're pretty sure maybe he's dead. But if he can land, if he can keep on his feet and stagger a little bit, maybe go lean on a horse hitching post or something, maybe he's just wounded. So
That's
all
what
that
moved through your mind?
in less than a second. So because I'm saying, okay, so when you land, you're going to be able to stand up. So of course I hit instantly face first in the dirt and couldn't move. So I immediately knew this is not too good.
Did you lose consciousness? Do you
No.
know? And then what happened?
A couple of my guys came up. One of the guys was already on the radio calling for a medevac. They were whispering, but I could still hear everything because one guy was saying, "What's this? Look at this brown fluid oozing out of his back." I think that was my left kidney that was removed, that was draining out of a hole. Shrapnel hit me everywhere except my head and my left arm. My left arm is in front of my body. And I don't know how many pieces went by each side of my head and over the top of my helmet, but there was a lot of them. And nothing went through the back of my neck or up through the back of my skull. I got hit in both feet, both thighs, both calves, both sides of the buttocks. Shrapnel went up under my flak vest. Almost severed my spine. Ripped into my kidney. Piece that missed my spine went in and hit my spleen, clipped my liver, cut some of my intestines. I got hit in the right elbow and right wrist. And they got a helicopter there, threw me on it, and I don't know how long it took.
The helicopter to come?
Yeah, and it flew in a beeline. It landed, I understood, 2 blocks from the hospital in Saigon. An ambulance was waiting. They threw me in the ambulance. When I got to the hospital, there was a group of nurses waiting for me. There must have been 3 or 4 of them at least. Of course, they're taking my dog tag so they know who the hell I am.
Is this an American hospital in Saigon?
I assumed it was a military hospital.
Okay.
And they're cutting my clothes off and they're talking to me, and they reeled me into the operating room, and I assume it was a surgeon came up to me, and I didn't have any clothes on at that point, and he pushed on my stomach and he says, "Does that hurt? Does it hurt more when I do that?" I said, "It doesn't affect me at all, one way or the other," and then that was it. I was out. The mask had gone on me. And I heard later that the head surgeon had been operating for 22 straight hours, kind of like a MASH episode.
Yeah.
And then they wheeled me in. And I believe my surgery lasted somewhere around 5 or 6 hours. I've always wondered, whether adrenaline keeps them going for
Yeah.
28 straight hours, you know, or whether they're taking methamphetamines or something. But the story I was told, you know, I got gutted like a fish from just above the genitals.
Yeah, we have a
Right.
photo of that as well, which we don't have here, but
And they took everything out and put it on the table and started patching me up and sewing me back up and putting me all back together. I was told by a nurse later on that they figured I had somewhere between maybe 9 and 12, 15 minutes to live when they cut me open. I was bleeding to death internally. So in any other war, I wouldn't have made it because they didn't have
oh,
that,
way
that
to
kind
get
of
you there.
they didn't have that kind of speed in helicopters in Korea. Or,
That's amazing. So do you think, did somebody radio for the helicopter before?
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, everybody knows.
And they were there in a flash.
I don't know how much time
It must
passed.
have been close.
Well, I think I was 75 miles from where I had to be at the hospital.
Okay.
So somebody had to get to where I was. I don't know how far they came from to get there. And then they had to get me to that landing zone 2 blocks from the hospital where the ambulance could get me to the hospital. So
And how long were you in the hospital there?
I think I was in intensive care in Saigon for 2 weeks. And then they flew me over to Tokyo, where I wasn't in intensive care. I was in a ward. Wasn't too many guys in the ward. And I think I was there for probably about a month. I remember it very distinctly because the men's room was at one end of this big ward. And the ward probably held 20 to 30 beds. And my bed was the second from the end, way down here. And because I'd lost a kidney, I had to pee every 2 hours. And of course they did that on purpose because I couldn't really walk. I couldn't lift my feet off the ground, so I just shuffle. I had slippers or little socket slippers, and literally I'd get down there, pee. I'd be so tired by the time I got back. About the time I recovered, I'd have to go do it again. But that actually obviously started the recovery going pretty quickly. So, and then I remember watching The Lone Ranger on TV, except it was in Japanese. So, but it was strange too.
Was that a Japanese hospital, or was it a base that we had?
I don't know if it was. I assume it was an American hospital in Japan, in Tokyo,
Okay.
because we still have military over there in Japan.
At what point were you awarded the Purple Heart thing?
Some
We want
officer.
to pick that up and share that, can you reach? Okay, we're good.
Some officer actually came into the intensive care unit in Saigon and pinned the medal on my pillow.
Were you aware enough to?
I vaguely recall it. I was in pretty bad shape. When I came to in the intensive care ward, I thought I was paralyzed. I couldn't move anything. I couldn't move a finger. I couldn't move an arm. I couldn't move a toe. I couldn't move a leg. So that was the first question I asked, what the hell future do I have? I thought the nurse was going to say I was paralyzed, but she said, no, you're not paralyzed. She said, you just are too weak to move.
Oh my gosh.
And it took quite a while before I could start to move. I was pretty heavily sedated. I found out later I was on a lot of morphine. I was on my back most of the time, but then they'd have to come move me, so they'd roll me over on my right side, and come over and roll me over on my left side. They couldn't let me lie on my stomach, because that's where all the incisions were. I had huge gaping wounds on my legs. I remember it distinctly. They didn't sew up my legs because they were afraid of gangrene, so they'd cut me open on each calf about that far, and it'd be about that deep, and it'd be about that wide. And they'd take the bandages off 2 or 3 times a day, and then they'd just fill me with hydrogen peroxide and let it bubble out, and then clean me up and rebandage me. And then later on, after they were pretty sure gangrene wasn't going to set in, then they sewed me back up.
That's a pretty phenomenal medical staff, I would say that. You
Unbelievable.
sustained a lot of injury.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I shouldn't be here. I think if that hand grenade goes off 100 times and there's 100 people standing exactly where I was when it exploded, there's 1 guy alive and 99 dead people. It's always fatal. It should be always fatal, the distance I was from it.
Did you feel yourself fighting to survive?
Oh, yeah. I have a fun story. So I was a smoker, so I still had an urge to smoke, and I was asking them to put me in a wheelchair so I could, finally move a little bit. And then the doctor said no. So finally I talked a nurse into putting a wheelchair by my bed. And I managed to get my legs out of the bed, hanging over. And I got stuff, tubes and things hanging in me. And I got the wheelchair arranged. I thought I could just kind of push myself off the bed, turn my rear end, and land and plop down in the wheelchair, which I pulled off reasonably well, but the problem was I only caught the front edge of the seat of the wheelchair. So I came crashing on the floor with the tubes and everything piling on top of me, and the wheelchair went sprawling. I made a huge racket. 4 or 5 people come running in, and I heard somebody say, if the goddamn kid wants to get in a wheelchair, put him in the damn wheelchair.
Did they do it?
Yeah. Not then. I think the next day they did. They put me back in bed. So
Where'd they move you?
hadn't thought of that.
Till now?
Till
Well, that's
I've
kind
thought
of
of it, but not for a long time.
That's,
So that indicates where my mind was. 'Cause,
Yeah. So you're fighting to get better.
Yeah, I survived. I'm going to live,
yeah.
and I'm going to do whatever I have to do.
Where'd they take you after Tokyo?
Is
that when you left the service?
I think I don't think we talked about this on Monday. I have a couple of good stories.
Yeah.
So I was flown on a stretcher, landed, I believe, at I think it was Alameda, and by mistake they took me to Oak Knoll Hospital, which is a Navy hospital in Oakland.
Okay.
Well, I was Army, and it was actually nice because that was closer to my friends who were still attending school in Berkeley, and to my parents who lived in the suburbs. So I had a friend of mine, one of my high school buddies. He came to visit me every day because at that point I had to shuffle around, the whole ward. Just keep moving and moving and moving. Because of all the injuries to my organs and internals, I didn't have anything to eat or drink. For the first 2 weeks I was in intensive care, and then I think I was on a liquid diet for much of the time I was in Tokyo. So I believe I weighed about 155 when I was in Vietnam. When I got to Oak Knoll, I think I weighed 121. So they had me on a diet of putting a lot of food in me. And not only that, I could have whatever I wanted. I could have milkshakes when I wanted. And then the first day they brought me lunch, there were 2 beers. And I learned later, because apparently there were a lot of calories, and they were going to fatten me up with a couple of beers. And there were 2 other guys in the room. It was a room for 4 beds, and there was 3 of us in there. And I told the nurse I didn't want the beers. I wasn't going to drink the beers. So she takes the beers and leaves, and both of the guys almost simultaneously, prop themselves up in the bed and say, "We're going to crawl out of here and beat you to death if you ever let those beers leave this room again." So after that, I kept the beers, and they each got a beer each day. So I remembered that, but I also remember when they finally got around to taking the stitches out of my rear end, because I had pretty big scars. And they had used stainless steel stitches, instead of little stitches like you see in that photo when I was gutted. This was some sort of new technique, the stainless steel. Anyway, they waited too long because the skin had grown over the stitches. So they gave me some Demerol and then removed the stitches, and I had to inform them at the end that you understand Demerol actually absolutely had no effect whatsoever, and it was incredibly painful because I'd been on morphine for probably over a month.
Oh,
But they were obviously weaning me off morphine.
That hurt.
And then I went over to Letterman, is where I should have been, which is an Army hospital on the Presidio in San Francisco.
Okay.
I originally was in the old hospital, but they built a new one that I got moved into later on. And I was sort of feeling sorry for myself. And they cured me of that real quickly because they assigned me to push the wheelchair of a special forces guy who had lost both legs, one above the knee, one below the knee, and lost one arm. And so that pretty well put things in perspective, and I never felt sorry for myself for another second. You really, you know, there, but for the grace of God, it could have been me.
How long were you at Letterman?
I don't know. I was in the hospital all of February, all of March. I think I got out probably in early April or something. I remember the first time my parents came and picked me up and I could leave the hospital. I was in the back seat of their car and we were driving through San Francisco, and a car backfired. And I had the back door open. We were moving. We were probably going about 25, 30. And I was ready to dive into the curb until I realized, no, this is San Francisco. Close the door.
Yeah.
That's not a gunshot. Yeah, I mean, just so trained that you dive and hit the dirt as soon as you start to hear gunfire. So.
What did you do after you got out of the service? After you got out of the hospital? After you got out of the service?
Self-medicated for a while. Stayed up till 3 or 4 a.m. I think that lasted about a month. Tried to start having a little fun. And then I decided I better start going to community college, and I did. And it took me 6 years, but from the time I started until I graduated UC Berkeley was 6 years. So, particularly, for the Vietnam veteran, we sort of hit our service. We didn't have anybody to talk to about it. I didn't know about half the benefits I had coming to me. It's another reason we have this Gold Coast Veterans Foundation, what we call the connection here, where the guys who are getting out of Iraq and Afghanistan are coming here, and they can come to one place, and they can learn about their federal benefits, state benefits, county benefits. They can get any kind of counseling they need. We can plug them into jobs and the businesses in the community. We have 130 organizations that have been vetted by the Military Collaborative that are providing services to veterans here. So we are making sure that these guys are getting everything they deserve, as all veterans should have received.
But that wasn't going on when you got out of the service?
No, I have another picture I'll see if the camera can pick up. This is a picture of me. I'm at Letterman Hospital, and this is my girlfriend at the time. One of the pieces of shrapnel hit me in the wrist here. And these fingers I can only move these two fingers sideways. I can make a fist and things, but these just hang out here. This also is always cold. It doesn't have good circulation. So they wanted to perform an operation. That's why I have a big long scar, because they came in here and I don't know if you can see it, but anyway, that's why you see this big bandage that goes all the way up my arm here. They went in to open me up to see if they could reattach the nerve and have it grow back together. And I think they found out they waited too long, and the nerve endings had atrophied, and even though they cut fresh endings, they weren't able to reattach it. But the reason I brought this up is you can see how I look. Now, I'm out of the Army at this point. I've been discharged from medical disability, so my hair is a little longer than the military, and I've got a goatee. So anyway, the surgery was scheduled, and I show up at the hospital on the day I was supposed to be admitted. And it turned out that President Nixon had made that day a national holiday, celebrating the first time we landed men on the moon. So the normal officer was supposed to be in charge of the hospital, wasn't there. I guess it was the number 2 or somebody else. But I was told that I would not be admitted into the hospital until I had a military haircut and was clean shaven. So I think this was a Friday, now that I think about it, because I waited until Monday, and then I called back up and I got a hold of the commander of the hospital, and I told him my story. I said, so now you're talking to a combat decorated, combat wounded veteran of Vietnam who was supposed to have surgery for part of his injuries in Vietnam, who's no longer in the service, who was not allowed to be admitted to the hospital when he was supposed to be. And I don't know where I got this, but I guess it was part of my smart aleck personality from before, which did make me a pretty good lawyer, that I told him he had 24 hours, to call me back and tell me everything's straightened out and I will be admitted, or I'm going to call all the local TV news and I'm going to call the local newspapers and I'm going to tell them my story. And we're going to see if we can't, get some exposure of how Vietnam veterans are being treated. And he called me back in less than 24 hours and said, come in tomorrow, you'll have no problems. So then when I get admitted, I guess some of the guys on the ward heard about it, and they're all clean shaven and got their military. So my room sort of became a meeting place. Everybody was coming in. We wanted to meet the guy who, stood up and didn't take guff. So the powers that be got a little offended by that. So they didn't want guys coming to my room. So the
Troublemaker.
yes, that's me. That's what my wife would say. So the psychiatric ward had yet to be opened, and nobody was there. So they moved me into that, and
Isolation.
isolation. Nobody could come visit me except my girlfriend. So it worked out pretty well. We were able to do things in that part of the hospital we couldn't do in the part they kicked me out of. But yeah, that was an interesting time. And then we didn't talk about this on Monday either, but
We didn't talk much about what you did after you got out.
well, not immediately. I grew my hair long and had a beard, rode a motorcycle, and I could get on military bases because I'm retired from medical disability. So I used to go on Oakland Army base and shop at the commissary. They didn't have much of a PX. One time, 2 MPs came into the commissary and, looked at my ID and then hit me 4 or 5 times at the billy club and said they didn't like me coming on the base, which I continued to do. So another time I came on the base, and as I was leaving the commissary, I bought some groceries, I got pulled over, and the MP said I was going 25 miles an hour in a 15-mile-an-hour zone. Of course, he pulls me over, and the sign says 25 miles an hour. So he says, oh, I was mistaken, you're going 35 miles an hour. So the short version is I refused to sign the ticket. Well, since I'm a civilian, they have to call the United States Marshal. So they take me where they could hold me on the base, and the United States Marshal's called. The United States Marshal called over, and he takes me, and I'm arrested, and I'm taken to jail in Oakland. I'm put in a cell because, what are you in for? I didn't sign a ticket because I didn't violate the speed limit. One guy was there for murder. He was going to be transferred to Oregon. He'd already been convicted of murder. Another guy was in there for robbery. I forget what the other guy was. Anyway, after 24 hours, I get bailed out, and I end up going over to San Francisco to see this magistrate. And I talked to him, and he says, well, we know they've got a really bad judge out there. They hate hippies. And he's got guys that are harassing hippie-looking Vietnam veterans every time they get on. So he told me that, because you're going to have to appear in front of this military judge on Oakland Army base. He said, when you get there, you can stand up and you can address the judge. You can say, and I forget exactly what it was, but something along the lines of, I want to exercise my right to have my case removed to the Federal District Court in San Francisco. And this is something that if the request is made, it has to be granted. So I stood up 2 or 3 times and tried to say it. And the third time he said, if you stand up again, I'm going to have you arrested for contempt of court. So I sat there, and he had his guys come up and tell their falsified story of what the speed was. And then finally he said, okay, now you can come up and you can testify. And I stood up right where I was, and I said, I've been trying since the time I got here, but you would not allow me to speak. I am exercising my right to have this case removed to the San Francisco Federal District Court. He looked like he wanted to shoot me from the bench, but
He had to do it.
he had to grant it, and I left, and I didn't come back there for a while. And anyway, the magistrate over in San Francisco said it's dismissed. 24 hours in jail for, anyway. So that's another reason why we are here in this center. I mean, to judge people based upon their appearance who happen to be people who were great patriots, made great sacrifices to their country, and to be mistreated is, we have a history of this,
Did you feel mistreated in other ways as a Vietnam vet?
I didn't really feel mistreated. I just felt like we wanted to not really, you didn't talk about your service. I mean, I've never had these conversations with people. So,
When that incident happened on the base, is that the point at which you were triggered to become a lawyer? Did you think about law school after that?
I don't know what triggered that. I'm going to ask you to come back to that question because I reminded you wanted to know what happened to me after I got out, and I left out something very important. So, I'm out of the Army, and this is before I had this surgery and before the incident with the long hair and the speeding on the base. I bought a small motorcycle and I picked it up and drove into the apartment in Berkeley where my two friends lived and showed it to them, talked for a while, and then I left. And it was in Claremont Avenue in Oakland. And I wasn't going very fast because I saw a Porsche coming down and had a left turn signal in, so I was going slow to make sure the driver had seen me. And just as I was about to go by the Porsche turned directly in front of me, and my motorcycle hit it instantly. I flew over the handlebars. My right knee hit her right front fender, because that's what hurt the most, my knee. I actually dented her fender, and that was steel. That was a steel fender that was dented by my knee. But unfortunately, my head went through the windshield of her car, and I had a helmet on. So I pulled my head out of the windshield, and I was just so angry. I was going to take my helmet off, and I was going to try and throw it through the hole in the windshield and hit her in the head. So I put my head down to pull my helmet out, and I noticed I was completely and totally covered in blood. So I got my helmet off. I took my hand and reached around, and I guess maybe it was this hand. I took this hand and buried my hand in my neck. So I was going to take my shirt off and tie a tourniquet around my neck, and I said, no, you can't do that. You can't have a tourniquet on your neck. And just then, an arm came around me, and a voice said, well, first, a hand went down in my neck, and then his arm went around me and said, why don't we walk over here and have you lie down on the sidewalk? Now, it's right in front of the DMV in Oakland. And somebody runs in to ask if there's a doctor, and there, sure enough, the head of Kaiser is there. Apparently, it was his daughter's 16th birthday. She was getting her license, so he came over and looked in, and he said, okay. He slowly wandered over his car, got his little black box, and came over, and he took a pair of scissors clamps, and I had severed my jugular vein.
Oh, God.
And so the guy who put his hand down my neck and his arm around me was a World War II medic, and the doctor swapped the scissor clamps for the guy's fingers, and I survived again. So I have at least 4 incidences. The first hand grenade by my foot, the jugular vein when I was killed, and then when somehow I couldn't let my buddy pick up that shell and would have killed us all. So
Wow.
I think that's another reason that I've been so committed to the center. My wife and I are the
Did you found
co-founders.
it? Okay.
This foundation was run at our expense, out of our business, for the first 5 years.
When did you found this?
I don't know the exact date. Probably this is year 6. So all the work was done. We opened the center a year ago, January. We have our executive director, J.C. Oberst, here now. Everything was transferred over to him in January of this year, December of last year, January of this year. And now we're running it here. I'm fortunate that our business is still busy, and we really didn't have the opportunity to continue to operate the foundation. But, you never know why you survive when there's 4 incidents was you should have been dead. And particularly when I think of Wesley, I always call him Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Why him, not me? So never known what I'm supposed to do, but I think this is part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, you said originally you didn't know, but I think you thought about it. And,
Yeah, it's kind of crept up on me.
yeah.
I've never been a person who at 16 or 20, "Oh, I think I'm going to do this." You asked me how I became a lawyer. So I wanted to be in school, so I went back into community college, then transferred to UC Berkeley. I had good grades.
Where they must have been protesting a lot.
They were, yeah. In fact, one of the days I went to visit my friends before I had the motorcycle accident, there was protests, and we were on UC Berkeley, and Reagan was governor of California, and that was the day they dropped tear gas from helicopters on the students protesting on campus, and it was
A weird feeling.
a very, very strange day for me because, I used to fly on helicopters and go into landing zones and, go into battle, and all of a sudden I'm a peaceful American citizen walking across the campus and being tear gassed. So, yeah, it was a different time back then.
And so you went to Berkeley, and then at what point did you decide you wanted to be an attorney?
Well, I just finished taking my last final. I graduated. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I was walking across the campus. I think I probably made the decision in somewhere between 2 and 4 minutes. I said, well, you like history. Maybe you want to get a master's degree in history and you can, become a teacher. I said, no, that'll probably be boring. I'll have to teach the same thing over and over. Why don't you become a lawyer? Okay, that was it. I had no mentor, nobody to talk to, no nothing. I literally made a decision probably in a couple of minutes. And
Did you meet your wife in law school? Is that where you met her? Is she an
no,
attorney also?
she was also an attorney.
That's what I
No,
thought,
we actually met after we had both graduated from law school. She's a Southern California girl, and her middle sister, her older sister, was married, and she and her husband had just built a home in Lafayette. And so her sister, who was also a lawyer, and her husband was a doctor, called her, my wife, her sister Lisa, and said, look, why don't you come up here and stay at our house and study for the bar exam, because we're both working all day. You'll be away from all your friends, family, no distractions, and you can just study here, you got your own room. So we both took the same bar review course that was being given at UC Berkeley to help you prepare to take the exam. So it started 2 days after Christmas in December of 1979, and we met the first day we came into class. The story Lisa likes to tell is I came into the room in a leather jacket with a motorcycle helmet under my arm, and I had to sign in because I had to be there because the federal government had paid for the last year of my law school under the voc rehab and was paying for me to become a lawyer. And she was sitting with some other female law graduate next to her, and she hadn't even seen my face. She turned to the woman and said, I'm going to marry that guy.
So
That was-
you were putty in her hands.
That was
after
30.
that.
That was 34 plus years ago. So
You had no choice.
obviously not.
Did you notice her?
Oh yes, yeah. That beautiful red hair.
You said there were certain things you wanted to get out on tape. I mean, you had some goals. I don't know what those things are in total, only you know, but do we get those?
I believe so.
Are there any other stories or stories of combat that anything about your time there that you
Well,
thought about that you want us to know?
I've felt this way ever since I got out of the Army. I've always believed that we should have universal service for every able-bodied man and woman in the United States. And I believe everybody able-bodied should serve for a minimum of 2 years from age 18 to 20, including potential military service. But I believe in it can be service assisting educators in inner city and poverty areas with teaching. It can be cleaning the environment. It can be working in nursing homes. Somehow between the ages of 18 and 20, when our hormones are raging, and we're just getting liberated from the control of our parents, and all kinds of things can go wrong with drugs or whatever, to be having to do 2 years of service, preferably in your community, to those in need, would be critically important. And I believe in the draft. because I believe the draft is what stopped Vietnam. Because enough people were against the war that they elected people to the House of Representatives who were against the war. And the House of Representatives did not vote to appropriate the money to continue the war. So the people stopped the war. And now we have an all-voluntary military. And I'm willing to bet that pretty close to the same percentage of people who didn't think Vietnam should have been fought probably felt that way at least about Iraq. But we have an all-voluntary military, and post 9/11, 1/2% have served.
Well, I can say Ben and Aaron feel that we should have been there, and they served for 15, 16 years.
And I did one tour in combat, and I know what, and I didn't even do a full year. I did 9 months. And we have on our website of this foundation, Army Ranger First Sergeant Vance Ogler, killed in Afghanistan on his 12th combat tour. I mean, I don't think any nation should be sending any person, even if they're a volunteer, into combat 12 separate times. Not 10, not 8, not 6. That's something that needs to be spread. And when the Senate voted to go to war in Iraq, 1 senator had a son in the military. 99 senators did not. And I was talking earlier this morning with the videographer who's here, Ed, about lunch I had with Bob Dole. Lisa and I had with Bob Dole one day, and we were lobbying for some disabled veteran legislation in D.C. And he turned to us at lunch and said, "This is the first time since the end of the Civil War that less than 50% of the Senate, 50% of the House of Representatives are veterans. Because in the Civil War we had a draft, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And so more than half of the Senate and the House were veterans for well over 100 years. And then I think the conversation we had with the senator was probably in 93 or 94. Of course, Bob Dole is a badly wounded, great patriot American. And I think it's too easy for people who are making a vote to go to war, but not their children, not their nieces, not their nephews, not their neighbors, not their co-workers' children. They don't really know anybody who's going to, I mean, it just seems to be, it should be a tougher vote.
So one of the purposes of your speaking is you wanted people to know what war is all about, what it's like.
It's pretty ugly. It's pretty horrible. It's, don't let anybody tell you there isn't hell on earth. There is. And a lot of our veterans who are returning now have lived it. And we owe them. That's why we're here. We owe them. We owe, and we can't repay what we owe. Can't be done. And shame on America for how they treated the Vietnam veterans, but they sure have learned. Because we are not treating this generation the way the Vietnam veterans had to hide their service. And why don't we go to war when it's in the national security interests of America and try and not keep our troops fighting? I mean, you add up how long we've been in Afghanistan and Iraq, the two together are over 21 years, post 9/11. 1/2% serving. Probably the average is close to 4 to 6 to 8 tours. And then if you want to go out there, imagine being a spouse or a young son or daughter. And over the first 10 years, your father or your mother has been in Iraq and Afghanistan 5, 6, 7 years out of that 10. What does that do to the kids, the families? You know, the 99.5% who haven't served need to think about that, and they need to all be in their communities doing something about it. Because we owe them big time. Not just the veterans, but the veterans' entire family. We're asking too much. It's unprecedented. We've never asked any generation to do what we've asked the post-9/11 military veterans to do. Never. Nobody has ever served that many tours in war in that short a period of time.
And so, how do you think your time has in the service, how did that change you? Did that galvanize you? It galvanized you, I think, to start the Gold Coast Veterans Foundation. And I don't know how else it affected you.
I think you were probably pretty accurate earlier when you mentioned this, and I don't think I really responded fully. I think probably being in the military and going to war probably unconsciously was a very, very strong motivation to become a lawyer. And then clearly Now that I've become a little more successful in business and I'm a little older, I have the time and the ability to give back. And we just need to get this, we need to get the public more involved. I mean, I remember the first time I was driven home by my parents when I got out of the hospital at Letterman. We were riding on the freeway and I'm just looking out the door and I'm going, everybody's just living their life. They're just racing by at 65 miles an hour. They don't know what these guys are going through in Vietnam. They're not thinking about it. And I think that's happening right now with, there's no draft, so most people don't really know somebody who served. I mean, a lot of families do, but there's a huge number of families that none of our children, none of our nieces and nephews or cousins, or there's not too many in our neighborhood. In the poorer neighborhoods, there'll be a lot more who have served. It's not that you have to serve, but boy, you better be aware of what we've asked, how much of a burden it's been on those who have served, and do something in your community. If you don't have money, be a volunteer. If you have money, find out who's doing great stuff for veterans and support those groups that are providing that. I mean, it's if you think about it and you look at yourself in the mirror in the morning and you realize you're not doing something, then you need to tell yourself you need to make that change. You need to do something. Everybody is capable of doing something.
How would you create that awareness? Maybe I'm putting you on the spot. But...
We're trying to do it here. We've hired a PR person because this Ventura County here has about 900,000 people. We have less than 1 million people. And our board talks about it. And we're wondering how many people know about our foundation. And it might be, today we might say, maybe 9,000, maybe 5,000, I don't really know. So we're really working on getting our story out, getting what we're doing here out, getting it in the media, getting it in the newspaper, getting it on the radio, ultimately getting it on local TV. Because if people hear about all the good things we're doing, then they'll say, that's something I really think should be done. I'm going to contribute to that. So we have some pretty big goals at our foundation. We've got a goal this year of raising $500,000. And we are a fundraising foundation. Our foundation pays the rent here for this space. We pay all the costs associated with it, including high-speed internet, so any soldier who comes in here is instantly connected because they're all wired. We pay for the phones. Every group and organization that comes here and provides services for the veterans in our community gets to use this space for free. And then we're also raising money to fund programs. We gave away $75,000 to various organizations last year, along with the Ventura County Community Foundation's Veterans Fund. And we're working with them again this year. We've raised $100,000 we just started the process of the RFP. We're going to be giving away $100,000 to organizations providing services. So this year with our PR representative, we think we're going to get a lot better coverage because we didn't get very much coverage last year. Because if people understand the issues confronting our veterans and the things we can do for them, I think everybody wants to do something. I just don't think we've had politicians getting out there and giving a speech. I'd love the president and the governors of every and the mayors of every city who have a public forum to be talking about what we can all do in our community to provide for the veterans who are returning to where we live. And I think everybody pretty much knows how horrific Iraq and Afghanistan has been for our troops, how long it's been. And if you read anything about, the issues facing veterans, you have to feel indebted to them, and everybody can do something. What's the military line? All gave some gave all. Well, that should be for the entire country. That should be for all of us should be giving something. And some can give a lot more because for whatever reason, talent, skills, amount of wealth. That's the campaign I'd like to see going. We've wound down Iraq. The Afghani veterans are coming back. We're going to be downsizing the military. They all need to get their families back. They need to get their education. If they're not going to fully go to college, they need to use their GI Bill to get job skills and training. We need all the businesses to be having programs to hire veterans. We had a meeting with the president of AT&T at the end of February this year, Tim Harden, an Annapolis graduate, a wonderful human being, former naval officer. And we were with our partner General Electric, who we do a lot of business with at AT&T. We were talking about what GE's doing in hiring veterans and what our company's doing in training and hiring veterans, which Tim supported. And then Tim mentioned that AT&T had a goal of hiring 5,000 veterans this year. Now, our meeting took place in Dallas on February 26th. At that meeting, he said we've hired 3,700 already, less than 2 months into the year. I think we need to up that number. So corporate America needs to start looking to see if they're keeping up with the people at AT&T and what they're doing.
Yeah, but so many of them are not doing well corporately and are having to let people go. It's a tough time for them to do that, I think.
Well, the companies that are doing well and are growing and are solid are the ones that should be doing the most. Obviously, any companies that's struggling, that's a completely separate issue. But we've got a lot of powerful businesses in this country. So, and I know a lot of them are stepping up. So my goal here at the Veterans Foundation, the Gold Coast Veterans Foundation, is just to do a better job of getting the word out in our community and get more and more people involved.
Is there anything else you want to add before we
That's
can-
probably more than enough. Thank you.
No, it's not more than enough. It's great to have on tape.
Thank
Well,
you very much to both of you for what you're doing here for the Library of Congress and for preserving stories that
Need to be told.
Americans need to hear from the veterans in all their communities.
Well, on behalf of our organization, which is the DAR and the country in general, I just want to thank you very much for your time today and for your service.
My pleasure. Thank you.